All right, number 3. I think you've had a chance to look at it now. I've put the diagram up on the board. This is a minimum wage problem. This is not a ceiling, but a floor now. We have a price floor, not a price ceiling. These are wages on this axis. Let me write that in there so you understand. So we got wages. And this is the demand for workers, and there's the supply of workers. So let's look at the question. It says, in this market, a minimum wage of $7.25 does what? Answer A, binding and creates a labor shortage. So a minimum wage of $7.25 is binding and creates a shortage. Well, is it binding? Well, if a minimum wage is $7.25, then it's certainly above equilibrium, right? If there's no minimum wage, the equilibrium wage is going to be $5 an hour. But because of the minimum wage is $7.25, this is how many workers are going to be demanded by the firm. This is how many workers want to work when the minimum wage is $7.25. So now we have the flip side of our question we did before in price ceiling. We now have this price floor in which the wage cannot fall below this point, $7.25. And because of it, firms will tend to demand, the quantity demanded of workers will be less among the firms, but workers like this. And so this is the supply curve of labor. The quantity supplied of labor will actually be relatively high. Again, what do we have? We have, in this case, a surplus. There are more workers who want to work at $7.25 an hour than there are firms that want to hire them at $7.25 an hour. So in this diagram, they've drawn it, the minimum wage is binding and it's causing a surplus of workers. There are people who are unemployed here. And that's one of the arguments against the minimum wage, is that it certainly helps those who get the jobs, but it can eliminate some jobs for others. And that's a trade-off. And, we don't quite know which one is better. It's better to have people earning more income, but at the same time, people unemployed is a real problem. So when you intervene in markets and you put in minimum wages, you have to realize there's probably going to be a consequence here, and that some workers who are willing to work at a wage below $5 aren't able to find those jobs. Okay? So, number A is obviously the answer. We went right to it. But I want to go through B and let's look at it. It says binding and creates unemployment. All right? Binding and creates, I spoke too soon. Binding and creates unemployment. So A is not the answer. Will you erase that from your heads? I apologize. I skipped ahead of myself. The second one, B, is binding and creates unemployment. But let me just clarify this particular point. There's not a shortage of labor in Part A. All right? In Part A, there's a surplus of labor, as we wrote about that. A shortage would have been if the minimum wage, there is no shortage here. All right? Basically, what happens is that there are workers who want to work, and only if the government forced the wage below equilibrium, which they really couldn't do, could you really have a shortage. But before I get you too confused here, we have a surplus of workers, not a shortage, which is why answer A is wrong. So now it sets up the answer to be B. It says binding and creates unemployment. Well, a surplus of workers is going to be unemployed workers. All right? Again, people willing to work at $7.25 an hour, firms not willing to hire them at that price. That's going to end up people looking for work and not finding it, so it's going to end up in a surplus. But in the labor market, we can interpret a surplus as unemployment. All right? So B is going to turn out to be the answer. Let's go to C, non-binding and creates a labor shortage. Well, immediately it's wrong because it is binding. It's binding again because the price floor does not allow the wage to fall to the equilibrium point of $5. It forces it to stay above equilibrium. Therefore, firms hire less workers who are willing to work. So in that sense, it is completely binding. All right? It's above equilibrium. D, non-binding and creates neither a labor shortage nor unemployment. Non-binding, it doesn't have any effect. No, it is binding. D would be correct if I had drawn the minimum wage at $2.75. Make sure you see that. If the minimum wage is $2.75, it's not binding because firms are going to pay $5 to hire the amount of workers they need in this particular market. So $2.75 would be a non-binding floor because the price basically won't fall that far. It'll stop at $5. So D would be correct if $2.75 were the minimum wage, but it's not. $7.25 is the minimum wage. This price floor can't go below that, right? This floor we're on, this price floor is binding and it creates a surplus for unemployed workers. That's it for number 3.